Welcome to Idle Red Hands, a podcast from Japan about gaming and gamer life.
And welcome to the Idle Red Hands. I'm Lyal.
I'm Jeremy.
So what we're going to do this episode is we're going to talk about Mutant Chronicles, the games, and the movie. And first we're going to talk about the board game because that's what inspired our newfound passion for it. Then we're going to do a review of the role-playing game, which we both bought. And finally, we're going to do a review of the Mutant Chronicles movie. Yes, we went there. I mean, you're the one that started it all because you discovered Siege of the Citadel, the board game, on Kickstarter. And if people are unfamiliar with Mutant Chronicles, I think it's fair to say it would be similar to 40K, but perhaps even more steampunk-ish. And it's mega corporations in the future fighting a dark legion is what they call, so demons from another universe or another world. Yeah, so both the board game and of course the role-playing game share the same history or premise in that it's all confined to our solar system. Earth is so polluted that most of the human race fled, led by these mega corporations like Capital, which is very American, Baz, which is the German, and then they have like the Japanese. Later on becomes the Brotherhood, so sort of like Vatican on steroids. And they colonize different parts of the solar system, such as Mars, the Moon, Venus,
Mercury. Mishima's on Mercury.
Yeah, Mercury. And Imperial, the British corporation, they're in the asteroid belt. And it's through the Imperial Corporation which the problems really arise. And then in their conquistadors, their explorers, they go out further and further in the solar system. And then they discover a tablet and touching it, and then all hell breaks loose. I guess literally in some sense. In that, if you've seen Event Horizon, or if you've seen 2001 Space Odyssey, you can kind of get the idea. You find a tablet or find something like, touching it triggers stuff to happen. Right.
Yeah, and I like that they had an explanation for their lack of technology, or for kind of their step back in technology. So this dark power not only corrupts people, but it infects what they call thinking machines. So anything electronic, anything digital based was then corrupted by this power. So the only way to fight that is to stop using it and to go back to your old machines, your more reliable firearms, your combustion engines, and to avoid all electrical thinking machines or any machine that could be possibly possessed by that power. So that's a great excuse. I always like when they give a nice reason for kind of stepping back and why they're using primitive technology.
No, I agree. I like that very simple, very in-game explanation for why the game has a certain aesthetic. Like 40K has a very nice aesthetic to it, but then it just we kind of forgot things, where this is we didn't forget, we just can't use it. We got to go back because not only does this dark symmetry corrupt machines, but machines are actually even more corruptible than humans. Usually humans are the weak link in everything, but here machines are even more susceptible to corruption. So I definitely like that explanation. A lot of great imagery. And of course, if you want to fight, something with a power armor versus demons, I mean, this is a game for you. Or power armor versus power armor.
Right.
You certainly have that.
Yeah, definitely.
And space samurai.
Yes. Yeah, I'm hoping, from what it looks like, the Siege of the Citadel board game seems to still keep a lot of that fun, keep the big shoulder pads and the big guns and really keep that. That's something that seemed to disappear pretty quickly in 40K as they started taking themselves much more seriously. And it's a crazy kind of wacky lore. And I guess in the 90s, they both had that same look, very exaggerated. But the Warhammer universe became much more serious. So I'm hoping that it seems like from the art that they're using for the RPG and everything, that they're maintaining some of that fun. And I hope the Siege of the Citadel board game and the miniatures also maintain that. It doesn't take itself too seriously, because it is a pretty over-the-top, ridiculous setting. So it's fun that has a sense of humor, and the exaggeration and the kind of parody of what they're doing is there.
So first up, what is Siege of the Citadel?
So Siege of the Citadel is a tabletop board game using miniatures, and similar to Space Hulk, where the premise is that you are capital forces against the Dark Legion, and what the Dark Legion did was establish these citadels on the outer planets, the outer rim of the solar system, as they started to push in towards where the humans were on Earth, and the Dark Citadel is one of their home bases on a planet. And so the story of this is just the attacking one of these structures and just campaigns within fighting the Dark Legion in that setting.
Yeah, had you ever played it before?
I haven't. No, I hadn't. I've watched some playthroughs and some unboxings, and just love the components and they did character dashboards and things back in the 90s. So that was they used their art really well, and I love the art. The original art of the tiles themselves were almost day-glow psychedelic. They were really crazy art of that time, and so that stuff is very charming to me. That wonky science fiction illustration of that time is always very charming, like the early Warhammer stuff. So that's what initially interested me in that. And then when I saw that they were using that same system and kind of just refining it and doing miniatures, remaking miniatures for everything, it just looked great.
Yeah, I mean, this game had really good reach back in the day, I guess the early 90s, in that it was in Toys R Us, like Siege of the Citadel and its sister games, Blood Berets. And Blood Berets are your badass Imperial power armor troopers who have blood red berets, much like British Commandos, I believe, or paratroopers.
Yeah.
And Fury of the Clansmen,
which is another capital faction, more like the Highlanders.
Yeah, Scottish Highland, Braveheart in space.
Right.
So I was always intrigued, but as a university student at the time, I was really committed to 40K and Fantasy Battle, and you only have so much money as a student. So they kind of just sat on the Toys R Us shelves, and I would pick them up and look at them. And maybe there was a bit of stigma, I suppose. Where you go into a gaming store and you buy a game, and you're with a bunch of gamers, but you go into Toys R Us, buy a game. Maybe there wasn't a stigma because it didn't really stop me from buying the Star Wars figures. So I don't know. I can't really explain it. I'm just trying to justify. And I mean, the tile laying board game concept, that's standard now.
Right.
But then, there was that game. There was, of course, as you mentioned, Space Hulk and Deathwing. But it wasn't as common.
Right.
And it's funny because when I first saw that, I had a chance to actually get my hands on it again, I went crazy and I was like, I just imagine me not buying it. I can't. And then as time wore on, I was like, oh, it's kind of like a tile game, miniatures. There's kind of a lot of those games out there. So I hemmed and hawed until you had mentioned just how many miniatures you get for the Dark Legion pledge, which is, it's not cheap. It was $150 for the pledge, and we're in Japan. We don't know how much the shipping's going to be.
Yeah, it'll be a nice surprise.
But there was just so much extra stuff that you got. And you have all the representing, if not all the factions, a good chunk. There's Bauhaus is represented, Capital, as you mentioned, Imperial, Mishima, Brotherhood,
yeah, and a lot of the named characters that I think were basically like who you chose from in the original board game. So named characters from that universe, and that's a nice thing. When we were interested in that game, then found out about the Modiphius RPG. So that's miniatures, and that's kind of how I've gotten suckered into a couple of Kickstarters by an RPG coming out and then a miniature game coming out. Wow, you'd have miniatures for that game and a huge amount of miniatures for the RPG.
Well, you just bought the Conan game. You just got the Conan game.
The Conan game with it. Yeah, crazy amount of miniatures. And so Modiphius is also doing the Conan RPG. So that was that was my justification, is that I have a lot of miniatures for both.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the quality of that was really great, and the scale of it was just excellent. So I'm looking forward to getting that on the table. Yeah, very much.
So we can't really talk too much about Siege of the Citadel, of course, because we don't have the game. But if you are interested, you can certainly go onto the Kickstarter, watch the video, and see what's there. I believe you can still get in on it.
Right. Yeah, I think they have
some late pledge options. We haven't even gotten our Pledge Master yet.
Right.
So I know I'm going to be upgrading after getting the RPG to getting all of the RPG stuff on PDF. Yeah. But we can give some insight into the Mutant Chronicles RPG. In this review, this is kind of a read through our review in that we haven't played it. We've looked at the main book, RPG book, as well as the player's guide,
right,
which is a stripped down version of the main book. Of course, a much lower price, but you get pretty much all of the character creation rules and the basic rules.
Yes, the basic mechanics and character creation, all of the tables and all the life path, and then character sheets and everything in the back.
So in this review, we'll talk about first just the production quality, the design. We'll talk about what you get in it, and then we'll also explain the mechanics and the system, both the standard system as well as the character creation. So first up, the main rule book is a hardcover book. It is quite heavy, really thick.
450, yeah, 450 pages. Pretty big, yeah.
Yeah, almost 500 pages. They're glossy pages with full color art. I'm always wary about the glossy pages. I'm not 100%. I could actually be totally fine with a book that's regular paper. black and white interior. And the reason is the pages tend to stick in
right.
the spine. And, a company's really got to invest the money in a proper binding in order to support the glossy pages. And it seems like they had. Like, I've had it for a couple weeks now, carry it on my commute every day so I can read through it so we could do this episode. And it still looks pretty good. Nothing's fallen out, so that's good. It has one of those ribbons to mark your page. But really, with an RPG book, you need multiple ribbons.
Yes. The same goes for the player's guide. It's the same production quality. It's a paperback, and it's about 100 pages. Essentially the same data from the main book, just restricted to what the players need to know. Yeah, the quality and the design and the layout is great. It's very readable and very useful.
Yeah, I was surprised, but it looks like the pages are pretty much the same pages right out of the main rule book, in that it has the same art, the same page design, which I imagine is just cheaper to do instead of redesigning it. It has glossy pages.
Yeah, I think the only thing that they kind of shy away from is any lore or any background that is going to be up to the GM to decide. So like kind of, what era of this timeline you're playing in, or what exactly you're doing, or is all left up, is all separate. So it's just basically the how to make a character in this world and how you would resolve different actions and what you would do. Maybe all the references to different, time periods and lore are not there.
So the main book starts off explaining the world, explaining the different factions that are involved, the timeline, which is pretty compelling, compact enough that it's not a chore to read through, what happens next. It really kind of brings you into the world, especially for a game master. It's important to read through it. And as Jeremy said, you're not committed to playing at a certain period. You can play at different points in that timeline. So it could be when the Dark Legions first appear, or it could be quite late. It could be during a civil war, in which there are several.
Right.
So that's really good. And then they get into the core mechanics, as well as the character creation system, and then they move on to all the rules you need, and then they repeat the history, providing more information on the history, as well as providing more information on the different factions and giving you the stats for the adversaries. Quite a lot. I mean, it's quite an extensive. I mean, there's different demon lords and all of their different minions. I initially thought they were only going to give the main lord and her main minions, but then they went through each and every one that they mentioned. So I thought that was a pretty good value.
Oh yeah.
And overall, I think the amount of information you get in the book, I can certainly see some of the things that they left out, but the amount of information that you get, both vehicles, adversaries, different career choices, is certainly enough to play for a long time. It's definitely good value, but it certainly whets your appetite enough that you might want to go out and buy the Bauhaus book if you've kind of really connected to them.
I like that how they gave very brief backgrounds on the mega corporations and kind of what world you're in, and left the rest of that for the game master, and then also have the source books to support each of the mega corporations and each of the settings, and then also the different time periods. So like we were talking about, we should mention that the period of Civil War, or that Dark Legion era that they talk about, was the setting of the original RPG that they did in the early 90s, but also the setting for Warzone, the miniatures game. And that was my first awareness of this universe, is when we were talking about Warzone. Because I borrowed those books from you, and I really love their lore. I mean, just that was what really drew me in and made me interested in the universe, because the background that they established, it was great. It had the feeling of the Warhammer world, but it was different enough, and it was kind of weirdly limited, that it was a little more primitive and a little bit more blood and guts, and I like that. I like that setting.
Yeah, the corporations are fairly distinct. I mean, as distinct as America and Britain, Germany, and Japan are, as well as the Vatican. There's also a corporation that we talked about how they've shunned technology or really scaled back, but this one corporation seems to be immune to it, or one organization seems to be immune to the corruption. So they have cybernetics and things like that.
Right. So. Going against the church's will, they are developing technologies. Yeah. And also the other interesting thing is, so the Earth is corrupted, and there was like a mass exodus to other planets to colonize, but the only people that stayed on the corrupted Earth and just kind of dug in and lived there were the Russians. Yeah. So there's this clans of Earth, which are all like kind of Russian based.
And I was unfamiliar with White Star until I bought the role-playing book.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't encounter them when I bought Warzone.
Right, yeah.
And so I don't know if they're new or not, but I was surprised.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it might have been a later edition, like something later that they added, because I think originally it was just the mega corporations, and then some additional things like the Brotherhood and things, were added. They're kind of outside the the main forces that they built for that world.
Yeah, and White Star is interesting because they flee. The corporations flee and they take all the best and brightest and richest off the world and leave a lot of people to suffer. And the Russians are like, okay, we're going to dig in. They take what they can and scavenge what they can. And when the corporations think it's kind of safe, they can terraform the Earth back to what it was. That always confused me. When the Earth is so polluted, but they have terraforming technology, but they think, well, I'll terraform Mars.
Right. Yeah.
I was like, okay, but I guess if you terraform Earth, it's going to hurt people, but you're abandoning the planet. Anyway,
Yes.
So they come back with the plan to take over the Earth, and they don't realize that White Star is there. And then White Star beats them back and says, look, you abandoned the planet, it's ours.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So it's kind of diverse, but I suppose you would say it's 1990s diverse.
Yes. in that way, yes.
Or 80s and 90s diverse in that Asia is Japan. So I mean, China is actually mentioned, and it might, I don't know if they'll do something a little bit more with it, but I think there was a terraforming accident in China. That's how they're mentioned. So, with Chinese people. Africa, I don't know. South America, who knows?
Right. Yeah, definitely is showing its limited scale of political views in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. That does appeal to me. I mean, that kind of stupidly simple and, a little bit sexist, a little bit, just like that's fun because that just reminds you of a simpler time when people, weren't so concerned with being inclusive.
Well, I should just say, you say about sexist. I think they made a real effort to include women. More so than
right.
I mean, they were even there in the original game as major characters,
right.
As well as like certainly serving in elite fighting units and things like that. And now, like even on the cover here, it's a man and a woman.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely necessary in any modern RPG because I think the gaming community is much more diverse than it was in the late 70s and early 80s.
Though we looked at the Kickstarter backers, and I said, I'm not going to stop until I see a female name, and then I gave up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just like, okay. Although some of those names could have been female. I was just unfamiliar. There's a lot of people from, I'm going to guess, Scandinavia.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
because this originally where it's from.
Right. Yeah, Target Games. Yeah, sweet. So originally, and I guess so the original version was part of a wave of non-English games being translated into English for the English market because role-playing games were popular at that time. And so should we talk about the system itself? So yeah, we're talking about the background and what's in the books, but it's the Modifius 2d20 system, meaning that for most skill tests, you're rolling 2 20-sided die and you've got a target number that you're trying to roll equal to or under for success. And they also, I guess, because one of the main developers came from the Star Wars role-playing games, maybe Fantasy Flight Star Wars role-playing games, Jay Little. So he was responsible for the 3rd edition core rules, and that's why it has the system of successes, and then it also has Dark Symmetry. Yeah, Dark Symmetry. So we have 2 additional point systems that are used, Chronicle Points for the players and Dark Symmetry for the GM.
Yeah. So it's as Jeremy said, it's a 2d20 system, which is like the core system. In addition, they have a thing called a Dark Symmetry die, which is a d6. And you can certainly buy a special d6, which has a symbol in place of the 6, but you can certainly get away with a regular d6, as they say in the game. And that's primarily used for damage. But for actually rolling for success, you use these 2d20. And your target number typically might be your ability plus your skill expertise. And if you roll a 1, you get an additional success. So
right.
it's the opposite to a game like Dungeons and Dragons.
Right. And so rolling a 20 instead of a critical hit is a repercussion. And so that generates 2 Dark Symmetry points for the GM's pool. Yeah, so in the future can complicate your situation.
Yeah. And like a game like the World of Darkness games where you roll multiple die and it's how many successes you get. This has that. Not only do you need to get, or the system isn't just about rolling 1 success on 2d20, you're often rolling to try to achieve 2, 3, or 4 successes because there's like skill difficulty, for example, and it doesn't add to your target number, so to speak. It adds to your target number of successes. And I really like the table that they have, which I looked at the different things that would cause difficulties, and it just is so SF. And it's so steampunk-esque, like this game. It really captured the flavor of the game. I mean, there's lighting, there's noise, a lack of oxygen, all of these things. And you're just looking at this table and you're like, That's great. And all of these would make succeeding in something more difficult. It was a really evocative table, which is odd because a lot of times you read about these complications or that, and it's just like kind of boring. But that just really, I thought, really captured the spirit of the game.
Yeah, that's great. I think when things like that, and especially random tables, are enhancing the setting or really connecting you to the world that you're in and what the players are doing, I think that's great. And giving that, allowing the GM to give that flavor to the players and to their actions is perfect.
So we said you might need to achieve 3 successes or 4 successes, but you only have two dice. So what do? Well, you can buy additional dice for using things called Chronicle Points, as Jeremy mentioned. So you start the game, I believe, or start a session with 3 Chronicle Points. There's ways to get more, but you start with 3. If you want to try to hit that really difficult task, you can buy more dice to roll. If you roll more successes, because we said, for example, if you roll a 1, you're going to get an additional success or 2 successes from that one roll. If you get more successes than you need, you get a thing called momentum, and these are things that you can use to trigger different. They kind of describe it as helping you to achieve more cinematic actions or successes.
Right. So more of a critical success, extra damage or extra. Extra.
Yeah, you don't flip, but you do the somersault and bounce off the wall and then hit the guy.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I thought that was pretty neat. And the Chronicle Points can be used for more than just buying extra dice to roll. So they have that. And with the other die, we said it's like a damage die. I mean, it's interesting in that 3, 4, and 5 do nothing when you roll it. Your damage is you roll a number of these dice, and then you count the 1s and 2s you get. And then if you roll a 6, then
that generates a dark symmetry point for the GM's pool.
Right.
And I like the note in the player's guide that they said a good GM will, whatever tokens or whatever coins you're using to represent those points, you're going to leave that in front of the game master's screen so that the players are aware of how much bad mojo they're generating and how terribly wrong things can go because of their failures and what's going on. So you get a large enough pool of that, and you might have a real bad round of combat, or you might have a real bad misfortune happen.
Yeah. So the dark symmetry pool is a pool of dice that the game master uses to do a number of things. For one thing, it can be used for initiative. So normal turn order, which is different than a lot of games, is that the players always go first, except if the game master spends dark symmetry points to say, no, it'd actually be better for this turn if I go first, or better for the story. But you still need to spend those dark symmetry points. Even achieving something like an ambush doesn't necessarily mean you go first. It just means that you get an additional d20 in your roll. You could also use the dark symmetry points to build dread or trigger dread.
Right. Yeah, for complications or interruptions to what the player characters are doing. So dread are points that player characters keep track of, and it's a kind of building condition that leads to negative that can create failure in rolls the higher that it gets. So on the player sheet they have a box grid that you use to track how many dread points your character is currently.
Yeah, and that's neat because you imagine like a game like Warhammer 40k or the role-playing spin-offs such as Death Watch, and they have a kind of a similar idea with the warp and chaos. But then I think this borrows more from Call of Cthulhu.
Ah, right.
Whether you're worried about building that insanity, because they really make a big deal of like corruption and how you can corrupt locations. And sometimes when you corrupt a location at a very low level, it has no effect on the system. It's just, they're just encouraging you to make an effect on the atmosphere. Like maybe some of the examples they use is like the light is extra glaring or extra harsh. The walls are decaying and that. I think that I like that they kind of have something that doesn't necessarily cause a disadvantage to the players, but just encourages the game master to really set the scene.
Yes, yeah.
Because if you don't set the scene in this world, and you don't always have to be fighting these demons, you could be fighting, of course, like corporations fighting each other, but it's a dirty world. It's definitely a dystopia. We've colonized the solar system because we had to, and we couldn't be bothered to save the earth. And we left a lot of people behind, and it's just like, never forget that when you play this game.
Right.
It's not a happy game.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And all the corporation versus corporation, and then people that are essentially mercenaries that are just, freelancers living on the top of all of that and just going to the highest bidder, doing jobs, based on who's going to pay them the most. Yeah. In a world like the Warhammer world, you could, in a kind of misdirected way, say, well, Space Marines and the Empire are good because they're human and Xenos and everything is bad. But, I like that that's their perspective, and actually everyone is pretty corrupt and pretty degenerate. That's what's creating, so much war and so much conflict. And so I think they did a good job of capturing that, keeping everybody kind of down in the mud. Yeah. And even the Brotherhood, the religious, are in it for their own motives and do terrible things.
I also like that it's quite easy to play corporations not only fighting each other but cooperating with each other, because even as they're fighting, they might be trading with each other.
Right. They'll have common interests.
Yeah, they have this overarching story of this Dark Legion that they always have to fight. So it's quite conceivable that you could have your players from everyone from a different corporation plus the Brotherhood and that, and they're all together. And why are they cooperating? Because, hey, Dark Legion. Mm-hmm. Or
right.
Why are they cooperating? Hey, our corporations have made a pact. This is a time of peace between our corporations, so deal with it. So unlike in 40K, where you can say they're all equally bad and equally good, I suppose. I don't know if you can say the orcs are that good, but you can't really have an orc player and a space marine cooperating.
There won't be yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, you can sort of have a space marine and an Eldar work together, but here you can have just about everybody work together. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important, because as much as you have a game where they talk about in Vampire the interclan rivalries, or in Werewolf the intertribe rivalries, your players might all come to the table. I want to be Geta Fenris, I want to be a Fianna, and it's the same here. Somebody could be really like Japan, and so they're going to want to play that Space Samurai,
right?
And somebody is rah America, they voted in Trump.
Yeah.
Then why tell them it's like no, you should play a Japanese character because this guy called dibs.
Right. Yeah, and that's curious too, because the kind of third time period that the previous RPGs and not really the rest of the universe hasn't really explored yet is what they were calling in the book Dark Eden. So that might be a time when everyone is united and all the corporations are working together against a very established, very difficult Dark Legion force. So, and that hasn't been fleshed out yet, and that's something that in the source books is coming. So that'll be a fun thing to explore in the RPG. So let's talk a bit about character generation. So what you do when you create a character is generate a character life path.
Which would be similar to what Traveler did, or I suppose still does, and what Battletech does in its RPG. Maybe it's something about science fiction games where they want to have this life path of what you studied, then what was your career, and what are you now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where your alliances were, and what languages you were speaking. And so for the life path, you start out with 5 life points, and so your attributes, which are basically your agility, dexterity, skill, they all start at 5 points, and you can spend those life points to raise any of those by 1, and you can also lower one of those to 4, which is kind of a weak or inept version of that skill. So if you want to be naturally stronger, maybe you have a worse personality, or if you want to be naturally dexterous, maybe you aren't as strong.
And different careers or different education systems will provide you with bonuses to your attributes.
Right.
So this is not the only time you can raise your attributes. So you could actually lower an attribute because you're going to do a certain career path or life path.
Right.
That will boost it more than what you need.
Right. And so the range of those, so 6 is considered normal level of that skill, and the maximum is 12. The maximum attribute level is 12. And so after those attributes are established, then you start to choose, you make certain career decisions. There's career path decisions that you make. So that first decision is your attributes, and on that life path there are 8 decisions that you have to make, and those are all choosing different parts of your origin, your career, how you're educated, what your background is. And there are 2 ways you can do that. You can either roll randomly on tables using D6, or you can, instead of just being given that initial 5 life points to augment your attributes, you can be given 12 life points, so you can actually choose how you want your character to be built, or what your background is.
Yeah, and you were saying, like, even though it looks like there's like two ways to do it, I mean, you could do the random way, and still you still do have some life points in which to goose a particular stage in that life path.
Right. Yeah. So that's nice. So if someone's not familiar with this world or really what any of these things mean and wants to go kind of totally random, I think you could be satisfied with that, and it'll give you a unique character. But if you have a specific idea for a build or a character type, you can use those 12 life points to either choose from tables or re-roll a random roll, or choose from higher level columns in certain tables. So where you start as just unemployed or military, you can move up to educated or a politician or a medic in certain occupation tables or certain career roles.
And I was surprised by the range of characters that you can end up with. I mean, you could have a celebrity, a noble, of course, the famous Doom Trooper, somebody think like a suicide trooper that doesn't really die, that fights the Dark Legion, detective, the Night Witches, if you're familiar with Russian history. There's actually a role-playing game now called Night Witches. Right. Which is the female pilots in World War II.
Yeah, Russian.
So there's like the White Stars. So.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's why they wanted to bring in the White Stars.
And the thing that I heard most about this RPG is that the range of settings and the range of possibilities were that open. You could go straight, Space Marine versus demons, or you could actually have a more detective investigating, corruption and supernatural occurrences.
And I think perhaps because you would expect to just do the straight up power troopers versus the demons, a lot of the fluff material is, set on Luna, which is an international city, it's a city on the moon. It's set there, and it's set at, at that detective level. There's a nice little bit of fluff about head of a corporation and what he does to a journalist. So you can see both the power of the journalist and, of course, the major weakness of the journalist, as well as what the corporations can do in their relationship with the Dark Legion. So I like that. And I also like what they did to for their backers. I mean, people who pledge a certain level, they would get their mention in the book, but it's more than just, hey, thanks, da-da-da. It was like, thanks, da-da-da, and here's a big story, here's a picture, here's the stats for these guys, and that was pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah,
like the fluff with the CEO and the journalist. The CEO is, a backer. There's a tank crew of three friends, I guess, and they all did it. And it's got a little picture of them. And that's what first thought. I saw this picture of a tank crew, and it goes, thanks to, like, who are these guys? Like, okay, they're big, because they're kind of normal names.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
So not only at different stages in your life path do you have chances to improve your attributes or your abilities, but you also have chances to add to your skills.
Yes.
And I really like what they do with skills, and they have two things. They have skills and talents. And you mentioned where somebody came from the Fantasy Flight Star Wars system and helped design this, and you can definitely see his fingerprints on this talent. But I think what they did here was better than what I saw in Edge of the Empire, in that the talents are very integrated in the skills. And it's like you have a skill, and then here's the talent tree connected to that skill. So if you have a skill, you can also choose to buy the talents at different stages. So, and for people familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, I suppose it would be like the skills in Dungeons and Dragons and the feats, except more integrated together.
Right, so that kind of our progression or kind of build.
Yeah, so you have the stealth skill, and then here are the feats that match that. So you need the skill in order to buy these feats. So just think of feats with all these skill prerequisites. And with skills, you have either expertise or you have focus. Expertise is pretty standard, what you would expect. It adds to your level of skill. Therefore, it makes it easier to roll a success because your number is higher.
Right.
Focus adds to kind of how many successes you can get, because it adds to your, what in Dungeons and Dragons they would call your critical range. So it adds to that one. So if you have one focus, now you can get an extra success on a roll of a 1 or a 2. So yeah, very much reminding me of Dungeons and Dragons, where you can add to hit, but then they also have that critical range. So if you do hit, then you get even more bonuses.
Right.
So I did like that about the game. So. And I judge a game a lot, or I judge a game system a lot on what they do with the skills, and I was certainly impressed with this.
Yeah, and it was I definitely think, you're spending your first session of this game creating your characters, because through those 8 decisions, there's a lot to kind of figure out which way you're going to go and what you're going to be specializing in, and where that's going to take you.
And I should mention, I did mention Luna, but I didn't mention that this city on the moon. I didn't mention how much material is in the role-playing book on it. There's a map of it, as well as all these different places. So certainly again, a lot of material. And all of, if you're an old fan of the Mutant Chronicles or Siege of the Citadels or Blood Berets, and there's a demon that you had in mind in the miniature, it's in the main book.
Yeah,
like there wasn't, I think they covered just about all the demons that I had been like kind of vaguely familiar with just looking at the art previously. So, and the demons cover a pretty broad range. If you think more Seven Deadly Sins,
right,
than the Chaos Gods. So you have the demon that's wrath, and there's your blood god. You have the demon that's more about deceit, and a demon like more about greed. So I thought that gave you a lot of possibilities. Of course, you've got your zombies, you've got your disease demons and stuff. So there's a lot you can do with that. I'm really impressed.
That's great. Yeah, and I think having that much information and then giving a roleplay group kind of a springboard to go in what direction that they want with the game, like how they want to play it and like what worlds they want to explore, what factions they're actually going to be aligned with. I think that's great, and they're producing so much source material for it. It's going to give a lot of options. It's a big world, and I think they've done a great job with it. And the system, the 2D20 system is very compelling, and I think the points, the Chronicle Points and Dark Symmetry, that makes for interesting mechanics.
I definitely recommend it, and I would even recommend it over games such as Fantasy Flight's Death Watch or Rogue Trader books. Even though those are very high quality books, I think this is just better and provides you more in the main book.
Yeah, one thing, especially the Fantasy Flight RPGs that have the specialized dice, I think the Warhammer Fantasy that they did and the Star Wars role-playing games for Fantasy Flight with their special dice with the special symbols, and they're all different colors, and you're rolling different dice pools for different actions in different situations. It reminds me of the scene from Willow, Billy Barty's line where he says,
I will consult the bones. The bones tell me nothing.
It's such a fortune-telling interpretation of these random symbols, and that situation always reminds me of how open to interpretation is that?
I hope that this dice fad dies.
Yes.
I think it is dying, but
yeah, definitely everything.
I think I understand. It's like, okay, people are gonna pirate the book and get the PDFs, so you make it where you gotta buy extra stuff
right
that you can't get online easily, but you kind of look at that and you're like, well, I don't really want to buy extra dice.
So all of this Mutant Chronicles talk and gameplay led us to watching the maybe infamous independent film Mutant Chronicles.
Well, I don't know how independent, because I had Ron Perlman.
Oh, that's true.
And Thomas Shane and John Malkovich.
I keep seeing it referred to as independent film, so that's why they're kind of making excuses for the level of special effects and everything that they. So I guess the budget was $20 million. So that's not an epic. That's not an epic sci-fi. So it's very curious. I guess the first thing that strikes you when you watch this movie is, how did this get made? And there must be some economic reason. Somebody had these rights, and somebody said, "Well, we got to do something with this before these rights lapse, and let's do this movie."
I suppose that maybe somebody bought the rights and they needed to make it. But if you just needed to make it, you didn't necessarily need Ron Perlman or Thomas Jane. But I guess they decided we need to get somebody people know, because they're not going to know Mutant Chronicles.
That's true. I think that was what they were doing to draw people in, is putting some.
Definitely filmed in Eastern Europe.
Right.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, and that's what makes you suspicious of this in that same way, why it was done, because it has that same kind of feeling. I mean, it's just a lot of people in front of green screens and a lot of subpar, very dark computer effects that are hidden by rain and hidden by just brown darkness.
So I guess we should explain about the movie, and we'll try with our movie reviews. We try not to do spoilers. We try to give you an idea of what the movie's like, so you can make a decision on whether or not you want to go spend money to see it. Or so people who are coming in it as fans of Mutant Chronicles, they certainly depart straight away.
Right.
In that it's set on Earth, which, as we explained, is not where the Mutant Chronicles is primarily set. Also, they kind of started with the Crusades or something, or they start off in like kind of a prehistory, but everybody's dressed like monks,
right?
So it's like the Crusades, and it's very, very Catholic, which is fine because the Brotherhood is very Catholic in the Mutant Chronicles. They actually provide an explanation for the title, Mutant Chronicles.
Right, they did.
They said they want to mutate everybody, and you're like, okay, all right. So that's why it's called the Mutant Chronicles.
Right.
And the idea is that they actually encountered the Dark Legion ages ago, which there are hints in the main history that something happened because it was like, we're always here, we'll always be.
Right, right.
But they were like, okay, we encountered them. It's a classic. They beat them. They don't destroy them for some reason. They bury them really deep, and they seal them up for whatever reason. But of course, a lot of stories do that. And this is all in the prologue, so it's not a spoiler. And then they seal them up. There's some swords. I guess they're important. They're so important that they put them all together and then let them collect dust.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the book. There's a book. Yeah, the book is kind of placed. Yeah, the book. I guess that's the Chronicles. Like that was Ron Perlman's book.
Yes. Yeah. And it's very precious until Ron Perlman wants to slam it on a table.
Right. Yes.
Or it's like, is that the same book?
Right.
And with a book like that, I mean, they've had like 1,000 years, a couple thousand years. You think somebody would have made like a few copies?
Right.
And it's like, okay, this is the special one, but here are some copies that you can travel with. And no, slam down the copy. Don't slam down this one.
Right.
Yeah, made on like cheaper material or something. Yeah.
The pocket version.
Yeah. The pocket guide to the Mutant Chronicles.
So after they establish all of that, then immediately we're in World War One, but we're in World War One in the far future. So yeah,
which is like Warzone.
Yeah, right.
And
So we're
in the Mutant Chronicles, but they really emphasize the trench warfare. What you don't realize at first is you're actually watching capital troops, i.e., American troops, fighting Bahas or Germans. They made the curious choice of casting primarily British actors to play capital. So you have Sean Pertwee, I think that's how you say his name. He's in there, and they're wearing. And he's talking to a bunch of other British people, and they're all wearing uniforms reminiscent of British World War I war uniforms. And Thomas Jane, who, an American, comes in and very much sticks out. You're like, oh, is he the capital helping Imperial?
Right.
And then you find out later that they were all capital. And that the Imperial guy speaks with received pronunciation. I don't know what was the difference between the capital British guys and the actually British Imperial guy. Yeah,
so this battle rages on, and of course their weapons disturb. The battle just happens to be taking place on the exact spot where they have captured the Dark Legion.
Yeah. And a seal, because if you're going to do a seal, that's really precious, and if you break this seal, you'll unleash literally hell on Earth. You really just want to leave it out there.
Let people have a war on it.
You wouldn't want to build anything over top of it.
Right.
Because there is a monastery where Ron Perlman is.
Yes.
He's one of the members of the Brotherhood. But that monastery is like miles and miles away. Like it's nowhere near. It's in the top of a mountain. You're like, hey, would have been a good place to put that seal? Maybe at the bottom of that mountain instead of where.
Yeah, that would have been a little better protected.
Yeah.
And as you can kind of tell from the setup, they're going to break that seal and something's going to be unleashed. And immediately in that first battle, that happens, and it very quickly becomes kind of a zombie movie. The people are infected, so they're just immediately they're confronting these dark forces, and it has a zombie feeling because people are taken and turned into these mutants.
So the dead come to life.
Right.
So they really pared down the kind of demons that you would face, or the Dark Legionnaires that you would face, down to one.
Right. Yeah. So it's just this spiky. So your hands are essentially spikes or some sort of organic knife, and you just impale everybody mindlessly. And that's what you're facing. And so it's a shame because they spend a lot of time talking about this great evil that was conquered and that they entombed and was awakened, but they don't give you any reason for why the technology is World War One, and it doesn't make any sense. And I think even they misunderstood and are assuming that this is actually kind of a steampunk technology, because we see some airships and things and they're running on steam. You have hot pipes that you can't touch, and you have billowing steam for these airships that they then are talking about reaching orbit. I don't know how that works at all.
Got the very fragile doors. Like every time one of these steamships shake, the the doors fly open and the fire burns the guys. And you're like,
Yeah,
what?
they're shoveling coal into the furnace, and those latches aren't secure.
You might wanna, so I actually liked like their airships, the guns.
Yeah, the designs. Yeah,
I did like the designs, but they don't explain it at all. Like you just got to go with it,
right?
And I think that could be a little bit bewildering for people. I will say that even though it is very dark to mask it, you can still see stuff.
Yeah,
and I really hate a movie where it's so dark that you can't actually see anything.
Yeah,
you can actually see things. It does an adequate job of masking the low special effects, but you can still make out what's going on. So they do have that, and also they do a good job in some points of showing in a very brief scene how the zombies would swarm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
right.
and these are in the fast, slow zombie spectrum. They're very fast. They're very strong. They're. I mean, there was that one scene where they're at the British, the Imperial. I don't know, the British Imperial or capital. They spoke with English accents. They looked British, but they could have been American.
Right.
Yeah. They're at a barricade trying to defend an evacuation zone, and then very quickly you see just all of these people rush onto the scene. They probably didn't have very many people to actually do it, but it was a very good camera shot, and where you're like, wow, I can really see them just swarming them, even though the other guys have guns.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, definitely the threat of that enemy was done very well, but it was just it's kind of just became its own thing, and I think that they kind of got rid of their source material. They weren't concerned with the source material and really just wanted to we've got this setting, and these World War I soldiers are fighting these zombie mutants, and
they immediately skipped it. It's like, okay, you've awakened it, it's here. Skip ahead to that they've swarmed the world. Like, you don't see anything.
Right.
It's just now we're evacuating the planet. So unlike the Mutant Chronicles, where they evacuated the planet because they had strip mined it and polluted it so badly that they had to leave Earth. Here, the Dark Legion is actually prompts the evacuation, which might be a little bit easier for people to understand the stakes. Maybe I don't know. I still think the original. I still think going to the edge of the solar system and unlocking the evils would have still worked. But I can understand the choice that they made.
Yeah, and also, not wanting to, to limit the effects to simply the mutants and some combat or some weapons, and not doing space travel, not doing, different locations, I think is what they pretty much decided they had to do.
Yeah, and they had to go, where can we film in, or they pretty much had to decide how do they incorporate Eastern Europe.
Yeah, right.
Wherever they were into the thing, and they was like, well, go to the monastery and then go underground so they can't see anything.
Right.
So that's the premise. What did you think of the acting and the writing? Yeah,
I thought it was okay. It was serviceable. I mean, they had some really, John Malkovich was in it, and Ron Perlman's in it. So these are people that you can kind of get reliable performances from. But I don't know.
But there are outliers.
Right. Yeah. But I think you could maybe criticize the director for just allowing the huge range of accents or accent choices by certain actors, because Ron Perlman was kind of doing an Irish Catholic priest.
Yeah, and by range of accents, he's actually only talking about Ron Perlman's performance, because he sometimes wanted to do an Irish accent and sometimes didn't.
Right.
And that happens, unfortunately, a lot with American actors. But wow, that was very inconsistent. Like, he just could not keep it up. He couldn't keep it up in the same sentence.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it was very odd. But also it was odd that if they were going to include, the Mishima, or they're going to have Asian characters and just have them speak Valley Girl English or very, American, like what do you think? It was very, it was.
Who'd you give your ticket to? The evacuation ticket. Yeah.
So that was a little. I mean, not that you have to have people doing really artificial accents, but it would have added to the flavor of, I guess, the thing that what happens after the world is infected is they have to assemble a group on a suicide mission to save the world, and so it's supposed to be
a
machine. That's right. That's right.
They have a part that they have to insert into a machine. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but
key to destroy that. That's established pretty early. So it's supposed to be a ragtag group of everybody from the different factions that occupy the world, and there's not a heck of a lot of diversity. Everyone's got pretty much the same American accent, and
there's the capital that they actually, for the capital team of 2, they do assemble Thomas Jane American and I'm going to say a Mexican American guy.
Yeah, Latino. Yeah, right. One of his brothers in arms. Yeah,
yeah,
in
somebody
the
who
first
doesn't
scene.
speak with a British accent. So.
Right.
And then the Imperial, they had, I'm going to assume two, but we only really see one who speak with British accents. And then German, two Germans.
Right. Yeah, the German, that I didn't hear a lot of accent in
Oh, because
him.
he's not played by a German.
Right, yeah, so he wasn't doing he wasn't doing much. Yeah, so it was very strange. It was very where they could have benefited from people doing accents or people reinforcing their, origin in that world, they completely ignored, and then they let Ron Perlman do his Irish.
Yeah. And it's not like all the monks are Irish or it's an Irish. I mean,
Nothing,
it's in mainland Europe, but yeah, so he decided to do that. John Malkovich, great actor. Don't know what he was doing.
Yeah,
Don't know
definitely.
what he was doing. Have you seen Rounders, the poker movie?
Oh, yeah.
And he's doing like an accent and doing stuff, and I guess the other actors are like, "What are you doing?" Like, I don't think people can direct John Malkovich.
Maybe
So
not.
you imagine the director was just too scared to say anything, John Malkovich, and I think he was still working through what he wanted to do, or drunk. I don't know.
Yeah, right. We don't know.
So he's doing something. He's doing something, but you're thinking like that's a few takes from success.
Yeah, but I think you even made the comment that's one take Malkovich. He was kind of doing it.
That was the take you had. Yeah. Beautiful, John. Hey, do you want me to do it again? I don't know how it could be better. Yeah. No, I think. But Thomas James, well, is serviceable. Yeah. He did his job. He's got to move the story along, and he does. He's the protagonist.
So the acting was decent, and it just wasn't. There just wasn't much there, and the overall, the overall story and what they had to do. It seemed like they were setting up a grand quest with this ragtag group of people, and it just quickly went nowhere. We quickly ran into they just get stuck, and it wasn't the excitement. They didn't have nice set pieces and keep continuing to kind of elevate. The scenes, like there wasn't more and more drama, more and more scale. Yeah, it just didn't go anywhere, and so you felt the budget really hard in that way.
I mean, they really only had they had clear acts, the first act, second act, third act, but they didn't have, like you said, the little battle so that they can kind of bond together,
right?
And then it gets progressive. It's pretty much okay. You're all together, and now go do it, which I imagine is kind of realistic. As realistic as like a Mutant Chronicles kind of movie could be, is that they're not going to say, "Hey, let's have a bonding exercise as we face the end of the world." Right. And they're really just trying to protect, not necessarily save Earth, but I suppose a little bit, or at least prevent them from seeking them out, because Ron Perlman or the Brotherhood knows is that they're not going to stop with Earth. They're going to keep following us.
Yeah.
Because the corporations were like, we'll just abandon them.
Yeah, right. That was John Malkovich's character was just like, we're done here. Let's get going. And it's like, we can't leave this. Yeah. But it was, it was the production and effects and things. But just as far as the story, they're just doing the bare minimum to kind of service that property that they licensed. And a lot of those video game based films that kind of came out of Germany, in that same way, have that feeling. It's just, it's just disappointing. It's almost, if you would have had the expectation this is a made-for-TV movie, it would have been okay. But if this, was actually released in theaters, it's
I don't know. It might have been straight to DVD.
That's true. It
has that aspect to it. I think it was made with the idea of like, let's see where this will go. But again, like, why Mutant Chronicles? Because we're not talking about a game that really was not popular at the time. Right. I think you were saying Fantasy Flight had come out with that pre-painted miniatures game,
right?
That went nowhere,
right?
Released at the wrong time, and again, nobody knows what these things are because
I would imagine they'd have more name recognition actually in Europe. So maybe that's a reason it was produced in Sweden. It was
produced number one in Sweden. It's funny, like, guess what the number one movie was? It was like World of Warcraft in China. Really? Beat Star Wars, and it's like, swept the Oscars of the Swedish Oscars.
That's true. Yeah, Ron Perlman
goes to Mutant Chronicles.
Ron Perlman got his lifetime achievement award. Best accent by a non-Irish. Yeah, definitely not a must-see. And didn't even, in our kind of Mutant Chronicles fervor, didn't really scratch any particular itch. I wasn't really like, it was great to see that on the big screen.
Yeah.
Because
I'm inspired to play.
because some of the Marvel movies are doing that. You're just, at least, you're not happy with it, but at least, wow, I finally saw that on the big screen. I saw, I saw that, but this didn't have that feeling.
Yeah, I'm a bit kinder. I could watch that again. Maybe if you like Mutant Chronicles, sure, watch it. It's not going to be exactly like Mutant Chronicles, but there's going to be enough similarities that you might enjoy it. It's laughably bad in some points, and there are some points where it's like some really good decisions were made.
Yeah.
So it's a real mixed bag. At the end of it, you'll still go, why did they make a Mutant Chronicles movie? Yeah. How did this get made? Like Jeremy's. But they made a movie of Midnight, the Fantasy Flight D20 game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The Dark Lord one. We have a great premise for an RPG. You're going to make this a movie? Of course, straight to DVD. And I think on Fantasy Flight Games budget or something.
Wow,
I don't know. I think they saved their petty cash a little bit.
Yeah.
It's really low budget, but certainly better than that. So I think definitely we're seeing if you like steampunk, because even though Jeremy said it's more steampunk than Mutant Chronicles actually is, but it's kind of nice to watch those airships go and some of the guns and.
Yeah, it was nice. There was some really nice design. Yeah, there's some, like you said, a mixed bag of some good choices and just some, whatever will do.
And cut. That was it. That's a really, really good. So I think it's a good time to be a Mutant Chronicles fan.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, either Siege of the Citadel. You're going to get lots of miniatures if you buy into that. I think you still can. Definitely. A strong recommendation from me is to get the RPG. I think they call it Techno Fantasy. It's right on the cover.
Right. Yeah, and they even define Techno Fantasy and dieselpunk in the player's guide. So yeah, that's fun.
That's right. Yeah, they don't call it steampunk. They call it dieselpunk.
Right. Yeah, because they're using combustion engines, not only coal and hot water.
Shovel away. Yeah.
As far as the miniatures game, Warzone the rights to Warzone went to Protos, and I guess they're producing Warzone Resurrection, which is in its second edition, and so they have a new rule book and really beautiful resin miniatures, and so that's what I'm really hoping the quality of the sculpting is like for Siege of the Citadel. They did a nice job kind of reimagining and D90s-ifying the less super deformed gigantism.
Yeah, like they would have some like really nice art, and then you went and got the miniature, like the Venusian Marshal, who looked amazing. Like he's a guy in a power armor on a horse. And then you look at the miniature and it was like somebody with half legs on a Shetland pony.
Right.
You're just, like I remember putting him back.
Yeah.
I was like so into Bauhaus. And it's like, they're selling the Warzone miniatures. There's oh my God, what happened to him? People familiar with Chronopia?
Oh,
similar style.
Right, and that's the fantasy.
Very
fantasy.
stunty legs. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the kind of fantasy spinoff of by the same company.
I wonder if that's gonna have a comeback, Chronopia.
I would love that. Yeah, it's interesting because it's a weird take on fantasy too, because they definitely everything is very corrupted, and I like that. Yeah, the humans and the elves and the dwarves are just miserable things, miserable races.
Yeah, the dwarves are animalistic with the animal totems, which is a really fresh take on dwarves. The elves maybe not as fresh, but still pretty cool in that they're very decadent. So very much like Michael Moorcock style of elf. When you think about Elric, you think of like Elric is in the Melnibone, I think that's how you pronounce it, society, and kind of just make them elves and then make them badass.
You're right.
With heavy armor and axes, and they got their elves. The humans, if you imagine Humongous from Road Warrior.
Oh, right.
Imagine an army of him.
Yes.
That would be the humans. Age of Sigmar kind of borrowed from that in a sense.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, but Age of Sigmar had the much clearer, good versus evil kind of. I guess which Warhammer Fantasy maybe always had a little bit more of. It was there's the good guys and the bad guys, but I liked the lore of Chronopia was good too, because it was just everyone is miserable and they're just fighting. I like that.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us for our Mutant Chronicles extravaganza. I hope But yeah, I sincerely hope that we've inspired you to at least give the games another look if you've already looked, or a first look if you haven't looked before. Bye.
Bye.
Drive-through RPG. We average 9 new titles a day. That's over 60 a week. And we've got well over 15,000 RPG titles online right now. Drive-through RPG. The one true source for RPGs.
Idle Red Hands, recorded in Kobe, Japan. See us online at www.idleredhands.com. Music provided by Tripod Jimmy, and the song was Roadkill. Hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.